how do you sort of, you've been doing this now for how many years is it?
2 years.
2 years. And how much longer do you give yourself doing this thing, going around being sort of
I don't know. I never thought I'd be doing it for 2 years even, you know. When we started off, I never thought we'd make it very big anyway. And then when we're making records for 2 years and everybody still goes around calling us quite a new group, you know, sort of. And I don't know, honestly. I think we've sort of pretty well set up for at least another year.
Hey, Rolling Stones fans, British Invasion fans, rock and roll fans, Jeff Witcher fans. This is installment number 4, episode number 4 in my Rolling Stones London Records deep dive video series. And today we're going to be talking about the first true Stones masterpiece, at least in my opinion. You could argue that Now was a masterpiece, but still, the Rolling Stones had not yet put it all together. Excellent songwriting, excellent R&B covers, great blues covers. They had the entire package on this record. And I'm talking, of course, about Out of Our Heads, which was released on July 30th of 1965. Now, I've always felt there was no band cooler than the Rolling Stones in 1965, and I include the Beatles in that equation. There was just something, like I mentioned in my Now video, there was just something undeniably hip and cool and badass about the Rolling Stones at this period of time, which is a shame because when you fast forward 10 years, you've got the Rolling Stones prancing around in goddamn sailor suits in the promotional video for It's Only Rock and Roll. So how times would change, not necessarily for the better, but anyway, in terms of image goes, you gotta love these early Rolling Stones. So anyway, what do we have on this album? Well, for starters, the U.S. market got the jump on this album. This album was not released in the UK until September 24th of 1965. So several months before the UK would hear any of these tracks, we got an album, and albeit the cover artwork is different. I actually prefer the American cover artwork. We would get the UK cover artwork on the next US album, December's Children and Everybody's. But I do think this cover works because we're talking about Out of Our Heads. And what do you have here? You got close-up shots of the Rolling Stones' heads. And so what is on this album? So basically, this song shares 6 tracks with the UK album. It's got both sides of the singles that were released in early 1965, The Last Time and I Can't Get No Satisfaction, both of which went to number 1 in the UK. And I Can't Get No Satisfaction was the first number 1 hit in the US. You've got one song from the UK only EP. So it was a live EP. It was called Got Live If You Want It, not to be confused with the US live album, which we will cover in a subsequent episode. It was actually comprised of completely different tracks than were on the US version, and it was an EP. But we got one track from there, and we've got a US only track, a track that had never appeared or would never appear in the UK until 1971. So basically that is the balance of this album. And for the first time, we also have 6 original Jagger Richard compositions, or Nanker Felge. So you've got 6 original group compositions on here, which was a first for any Rolling Stones album. And I'm going to say, and I don't think there's going to be much debate to this, this is the better album. It just is better than the UK. And like every person who wants to argue for the UK album, I know the UK album was what the Rolling Stones intended, but this is just a better album because it's got 2 standout singles, The Last Time and I Can't Get No Satisfaction, much in the way Meet the Beatles is a better album than With the Beatles because you've got I Want to Hold Your Hand on there. So anyway, what do we have on here? We've got, starting off with the 6 tracks that were also on the UK Out of Our Heads album. You've got Mercy Mercy, which was a Don Covey, Ron Miller composition. It was recorded by Don Covey and released in August of 1964. You've got a Marvin Gaye cover, Hitchhike, which was written by Marvin Gaye, Clarence Paul, and William Mickey Stevenson. That appeared in December of 1962 on Marvin Gaye's That Stubborn Kind of Fellow LP. You've got That's How Strong My Love Is, which was written by Roosevelt Jameson. It was originally recorded by O.V. Wright in 1964, and then Otis Redding covered it on his LP, The Great Otis Redding Sings Soul Ballads, from March of 1965. You've got Good Times, a Sam Cooke cover, which he recorded and released as a single in July of 1964. You've got Cry to Me, written by Bert Burns, which was a Solomon Burke single from back in 1962. And you've got the Under Assistant West Coast Promotion Man, which was a Nanker Felge group composition. As I said before, you've got the A-side of their February 1965 UK single, The Last Time, which would appear a month later in March of 1965 in the US, and the B-side, Play with Fire. Easily could have been an A-side. That was a Nanker Felge composition. And you've got I Can't Get No Satisfaction, which was released as a single in the US in June of 1965, went straight to #1, but it wasn't released in the UK until August of 1965, but it was their 4th #1 single in the UK. And the B-side is The Spider and the Fly, not as strong as Play with Fire, but still great track, another Jagger Richards composition. The track from the Got Live If You Want It EP was a Bo Diddley cover called I'm All Right, and that was released on Bo Diddley's Beach Party LP in 1963. And then the US only release that we have here is another Jagger Richards original composition called One More Try. This would not be released in the UK, like I said before, until 1971 on the Stone Age compilation. So for me, I really feel like this album hangs together like no other Rolling Stones to date does. You got the blistering cover of Mercy Mercy, the great cover of Hitchhike, The Last Time, which is one of my favorite 1960 Rolling Stones singles with that great riff. Finally, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards came up with the goods. The story goes that they got locked into a room by Andrew Loog Oldham and told, you're not coming out of here until you write a hit song. And I'll be damned, The Last Time is phenomenal. And also the B-side, Play with Fire, which was one of the more moody, introspective, original compositions that Jagger and Richards would come up with. And then, I mean, what more can be said about I Can't Get No Satisfaction? And I was reading today, too, I didn't realize this, but that fuzz guitar riff that you hear, Richards was trying to approximate as best he could where he felt the horns, because they originally, I guess, intended for there to be horns on this track. And so Keith Richards just played fuzz guitar, meaning, okay, this is a section where the horns are going to come in. I'm very glad they didn't add horns, because I can't imagine it. I mean, I can kind of imagine it because Otis Redding did a cover of Satisfaction where he used horns, and you could sort of see how that song might have sounded had the Rolling Stones gone in that direction. I'm glad they didn't. I can't imagine hearing that song in that arrangement. And The Spider and the Fly is not a bad song. I'm just saying it's not like A-side worthy material. But I love, there's not a weak track on here. I mean, you could argue maybe I'm All Right is a little bit underwhelming. One More Try is okay. The only thing with that track is Keith Richards' falsetto harmonies on that. Not entirely in love with it, but again, solid album. Now, what does my copy look like? So what do I have in my collection? Well, this is the version that I was showing. This is a mono copy. And if you've ever seen this album out in the wild, one of the things that is characteristic of these used copies is a great deal of ring wear. If you can find a clean copy of this without ring wear, amazing. Josh should probably find one in Savers next week. But anyway, all of them, just because it was a darker cover, it was well worn. People played this album to death. And so the cover is a little beat up, at least the original pressings. This is, again, on the maroon London label, as all mono pressings were. But I did manage to find an 80s pressing of this record, which is very clean. It's still in the shrink. Got a little bit of a black banner here with the London logo, but in every other way, it looks pretty much the same as the cover of the original pressing. Got a little barcode there in the corner, so I'm glad I've got a relatively clean copy of that. This is the first CD pressing. I believe it came out in 1986, if I'm not mistaken. It looks a lot like all the Rolling Stones ABKCO CDs looked. Got the track listing there. And then if you open this up, you get a reproduction of the back cover from the original vinyl album. And then, of course, it was re-released on SACD along with the rest of the ABKCO London releases. Replicated a little bit of the back cover there. And then you open it up again. It's a customized CD. Photographs from the back. The liner notes are here. And you take the CD out and looks exactly like the CD, so nothing too exciting there. I'm not a Digipack guy. I try to keep this as wear-free as possible. I do like the fact that the original CD replicates the original packaging from the vinyl much more accurately than this does, but the sound quality on here is somewhat better, I will say that. These are the singles that I do have. This is my copy of The Last Time with Play With Fire on the flip. And then this is I Can't Get No Satisfaction and the Under Assistant West Coast Promo Man. Which I'm not mistaken, I think Andrew Luke Oldham had a hand in some of the lyrics with that. I don't know. I could just be misremembering it. But nonetheless, how do I rank it compared to the first three Rolling Stones releases? I definitely put it number one. I would put Now number two. I think I would rank the first Rolling Stones album number three. And then I think 12 by 5 would be fourth. I like all the albums, don't get me wrong, but, if you're going to ask me how would I rank them so far, that would be what I would rank them. Now, if you're looking to find that album out in the wild, a decent copy, you're probably going to pay at least $20. Upwards of $20, just because, as I've left in some of the comment section or some of the comments that I've gotten, I've responded to some of those. In terms of finding those albums, they weren't sold in the volumes that the Beatles albums were. That's why you can find a lot more copies of Help and Beatles 65 and Beatles 6 than you will ever find of Out of Our Heads or even December's Children. It's just the way it is. I think the American record buying public hadn't yet caught on to the Stones, so they weren't pressing as many copies of those early Stones album as they were the Beatles albums, which were selling like hotcakes. So anyway, that is my deep dive into one of my favorite 60s Rolling Stones albums. Hope you're enjoying this series. Let me know what you think of the album, and take care. We'll see you for December's Children next time.